The point of an occasion like this is to say thank you. I think we have been incredibly fortunate. I'll say a bit more about where we came from and where we are. And I think we've been fortunate mostly because we have people like you have agreed to work with us. There's some of you who work for JPAL, some of you have worked with JPAL, some of you I hope will work with JPAL in the future, and that has, I think, that's the main story. And in a sense, I could stop here and say just thank you. But I thought just to flesh that out, I'll tell you a little potted history of JPAL over the last 10 years in South Asia. So I have a pretty vivid memory of the first time I broached the idea of a randomized controlled trial in India. And I know almost exactly to the date. It was, I think, the 16th or 17th of July in 1996, and I was in Udaipur talking to Seva Mandir, trying to sell them the idea that they should do a randomized controlled trial. And I think the remarkable thing about Seva Mandir as an organization was that they actually gave us kind of a real hearing. This was not necessarily obvious. You know, you could have imagined people just kind of saying, "Are you crazy or what? You want to randomize? Why would you want to do that? This is not the lab." I mean, those responses are all I've heard before and after that date. But this was a day where it was a lucky day, and when we walked into this almost endless meeting, one thing that if you ever work with Seva Mandir is very nice is that they're very, very, very polite. So they don't actually ever kind of pin you down and say, sort of say something aggressive, but it's always like, but how could that possibly be? How would you deal with this problem or that problem? And, how could you, what's the point of randomizing? Can't we just do this or that? So we had this kind of elaborate methodological conversation over, I would say, 6 hours. Sitting in Nilima Khetan. Nilima was then the secretary of Seva Mandir in her veranda. And over 6 hours, we had this conversation interrupted by lunch where we kind of go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And I was there were many points when I thought that, this is just a charade. They're so polite, they can't kick me out, so we keep going on. But eventually, they'll get to the point, I'll get kicked out. And then they agreed. And they agreed to do a randomized controlled trial. I was kind of almost shocked by the fact that we had got there. But fine, we start. And the first thing what will we do the randomized controlled trial on? Well, it was on education, and it was something that they wanted to make sure that this was like something that we're going to do something that's easy. So they said, okay, we're going to double the number of teachers. We're planning to do that, and we'll see how much that affects test scores. And this was, I think, there was kind of consensus in the room that this is not the most interesting evaluation. We're not going to learn anything particularly surprising about this, but what the hell? So we did it, and then suddenly we get the data, and there's nothing happened, absolutely nothing. No test scores changed, no outcomes other than 3 children showed up, extra children showed up per school, where there were 2 teachers. The teachers seemed to bring some children with them, but no other outcome in the school, neither the pedagogy nor, in a sense, the way the teachers related to the children, nor any test score outcome changed even a little bit. And suddenly there was a kind of a moment where I thought, okay, maybe actually now they're going to kick us out, because we have confirmed their belief that this is all, there's something deeply wrong about what we are doing. But we delivered the message. They said, no, yeah, that's interesting. And they basically stopped expanding this program of adding teachers. And I said, my God, We can actually change things. And that's sort of when you get hooked on the Kool-Aid, because you sort of feel that, okay, you actually are delivering something useful and concrete, and people are actually taking it seriously. So while this is happening, or it's a little bit, I guess this is just over, when I think Madhav Chavan walks into my office at MIT. I've told this story many times to Madhav, so he'll be tired of hearing it, but he came, he came to my office, we discussed what Pratham is doing, and to demonstrate that how serious he was, he brought us some toys. I don't know why the toys were particularly important in convincing us that this was a serious effort, but I remember the toys, they were kind of neat. And then somehow we started working with them on a randomized control trial, again on education, but this time in urban Mumbai and Baroda. So that was sort of where we cut our teeth, I would say. It's where we learned all the pitfalls of doing randomized control trials. One of the things was in the middle of the first year, I might get the order wrong, but I think the first year of doing this, when we went back to collect the data, there was the Gujarat earthquake. So that was bad, and it was a bit of a problem collecting data because some of the places were no longer there. 1 year later, we have to collect the next round of data, and of course, there's the Gujarat riots and so on. And we learned in the process that despite that, we actually did manage to get some results. There was something we actually learned from that process, and I'll come back to that experience several times today. But it was kind of baptism by fire, because you suddenly go into this world where you think, okay, this is a matter of collecting data, but no, it's a matter of figuring out where the people who used to be there moved because there was a riot in their neighborhood, or there was a earthquake, or various other. The idea that one project will be hit by 2 such disasters in 2 years hadn't occurred to us, so we learned to be, let's say, a bit more conservative about our planning. So that's how we got started. It was kind of remarkable that we got, I think the fact that we got 2 partners as remarkable as Seva Mandir and Pratham, it was a huge piece of luck. I don't think that we would have, I think we might have lost heart if we didn't find them. They were extraordinarily patient, extraordinarily quick to understand why we wanted what we wanted, and willing to give us a long leash, which was important because we were also learning the trade. So there were things that we did that were not, there were screw-ups along the way. We were learning the tricks of the trade, so it took us a while to get our feet on the ground. And so this was great. And then the next good thing that happened was we met Nina, who's somewhere there. Yeah. And Nina invited us, and this was kind of, we were moving into the big league. She invited us to work with the police department of Rajasthan to test a set of reforms of policing. Now, this was really, several steps beyond anything else we had thought of, because this was just the scale of it. This was covered many districts. It covered, it required permissions for all the way up to the chief minister. There was there's all kinds of ways in which it was kind of, we had really moved into the big league. And it gave us, I think, both important understanding of what could and couldn't be implemented in this context. There's some things that we realized where, you do an RCT, you say that, okay, we're going to randomize this and that and the other, but of course, there is some human interface there. Somebody decides whether that particular decision is going to be implemented or not. And we realized quickly that, sadly, I would say, all the decisions that were done could be taken from the top down, were implemented, and everything that had to be implemented at the bottom was not implemented. So we learned something not just about the impact of these things, but also about what it takes to do an RCT. I think we were beginning to learn that about the politics of how to organize an RCT, and a lot of that is about thinking about who can you rely on to be the change agent at different levels. And that's something that's absolutely crucial, I think, in my now understanding of RCTs, but it wasn't, I don't think we understood that then. I think we've hit that many times, which is that, you try to kind of, you can get agreement many times from people at the top, or who will say, yes, 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 this is great. But then to get it to actually work at the ground level is often a challenge. And it's not that we haven't succeeded. We've succeeded many, many times. But and I'm going to give you some examples. But it requires a certain sophistication in the understanding of the process. And I'll come back to an example of that in a bit. In the meanwhile, we've been expanding. This measles picture is us today. It's this is the 172 completed and ongoing randomized controlled trials that you see, and along with various other things that are going on, many of which are sort of partnerships that we have built, and I'll talk about at least one of them in a minute, with governments all over India to take forward the lessons from many of these now completed RCTs. So this is sort of where we are. I think many of you know us well, so maybe this is tedious, but we work in every area of social policy, I would say, and many of them are maybe not obvious ones. Like crime for us is a big sort of potential area of work. So we're interested in kind of anti-poverty policy as broadly thought of as possible, and we would like to be involved in even broader context. What we do is collect data, manage data. That's one very big part. I think that if I had to, the people who, in a sense, I should be giving thanks to are not in this room. They are collecting data. They are enormous number. At any point, we have 1,000 people on the ground collecting data, sometimes many more than that. And that's core to our mission. It's what makes what we do, I think, credible, is the fact that we actually take a lot of trouble making sure the data is reliable. And this is something that if you have never collected data, you have a hard time even visualizing this process. Shovini made some reference to filling out Excel sheet, but it's an enormous factory. You go from the entry of the data just to figure out how to enter the data efficiently is a major job, and then how to put that, what software to use to bring this data into so that it can be used by researchers, and all of these things are stuff that people in JPAL, Vipin being our leader, do all the time. So this is an area where we are really now we have a really specialized group of people who have competences which I think we didn't imagine having 10 years ago. So right now, I think we are as sophisticated in collecting data as I would say any organization in the world. We really have developed an enormous competence here, and this is work that doesn't show up in publications, doesn't show up in newspapers, but it is perhaps the hardest bit, which is to do it right, do it patiently, do it over and over and over. It's tedious, it's boring, it's you have to go and interview somebody and ask the same question with the same level of interest day after day after day, hundreds of people. And to do it well, to do it with commitment, that's extremely difficult. And I think one of the, I would say, I use a lot of the data we produce, and I see just the quality of the data, how little cleaning it needs. In fact, that's often, it's extremely high quality data that we generate. It's something that I don't know whether, many of you probably don't need to worry about this, but it is really something of a part of our identity, that we care about it, we invest in it, we actually know how to do it now. So that's one other thing that we, now, but I think that, to say that we do randomized controlled trials, we collect data, I think at some level is useful, but I think it kind of little bit underplays, I think, what the challenge we face. So, yes, we do randomized controlled trials, we get results. But then we get the question, well, but that was, how do you know that works anywhere else? How do you know that you did one randomized controlled trial with Pratham in Baroda? What does that have anything to do with what we're going to do in Uttarakhand? And that's a question we keep getting, and it's the right question. It's the question that any social scientist, it's not just for us, it's the right question for any social scientist. In a sense, it's always the same question. How can you take what you learned in a specific context to somewhere else? And I think the process of doing that has two pieces. One is just trying it several times in different contexts, which we also try to do. We try to have multiple randomized controlled trials. The other, I think, which is less easy to kind of describe, but is equally important, is when we do the work, we try to also think, what could be driving this? So when we find certain things, like, for example, when we found that in Seva Mandir, when you added a whole extra teacher, you doubled the teacher-student ratio, nothing happened. How could that possibly be? It's a question that I started thinking about, 20 years ago. And I think I know more or less the answer now, but it took me a long time to piece it together. And a lot of that, the way we pieced it together was kind of through a series of trials of slightly different things, mostly working with Pratham, trying different things, succeeding sometimes, failing sometimes. And through that process, I think we figured out what it was. I'll come back to, maybe I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute, but that process is something we need to do all the time. So in other words, one thing that isn't given directly by the randomized controlled trial is sort of an interpretation and a story about what lies behind this. Why is it that we're finding what we're finding? Why should we expect it to happen again? And we should expect it to happen again precisely because we have an understanding that there is a core problem that is repeating, is there everywhere, and that problem needs solving. And because we have, so in other words, there's a kind of a less easy to articulate step, which takes us from the evidence of the randomized controlled trial to any statements we make that are more or less generalizable about the world. And that step is where we're always a bit struggling. We're always trying to tweak this and that and try to see if, if this didn't work, that does work, or if, and in reverse. So this is an example. This is a RCT we did in Udaipur with Seva Mandir in 2004 to 2007. This was an interesting exercise because it was kind of, the problem what we were solving was that children were not getting immunized. The problem was, and we asked people why, and there were two answers. One, and everybody had one or the other answer, and they were confident they were right. One answer, it's because the government, the people who are doing the immunization don't do their job. That answer we got from many people, everybody outside the government, roughly. Then there was the government answer, which was also very systematic, which is that these people they don't want to get immunized. That was always the government answer. And we were kind of baffled because, it was, we didn't know which was true, but these were clearly, would require very different interventions. So what we did was we did a randomized control trial where we combined the two, where we, offered people reliable delivery. So to deal with the government failing, we offered Seva Mandir offered reliable delivery of immunization. That did something, but it kind of increased full immunization rates from 6% to 17%. Now what really worked was giving them a kilo of dal. If you offered, every time you get immunized, you get a kilo of dal, it went from 17% to 37%. So this was something that nobody had predicted. So basically, if you believe that people have a passionate opposition to immunization, then you should see nothing. If you think that the government is all the problem, then we should have gone from 0 to 100% when it was offered reliably. In fact, it turned out that the dal was extremely important. So, and I think this is something that we have now found in many different contexts. Small incentives have big effects on the demand for kind of good things to do. People want to do good things, but then they don't do it. But if you give them a small reward, they actually do it. But the problem with this intervention was that it was extremely complicated. Carrying dal everywhere, big bags of dal on a scale that would, cover all of India is logistically impossible. I mean, you don't want to reproduce the Food Corporation of India. It's already a disaster we already have. We want to do it again. So what could we do? So we came up with an idea which was to use mobile phone-based. So instead of dal, we'll give them a top-up on a phone. And then question is, and to create a monitoring interface that went with it, which also didn't require us to go and check if the children are getting immunized. And so all of that could be used using the technology we have now. So again, go back to what I was trying to say a minute ago, which is that there is a concept, which is that small incentives will have big effects. But the concept can have many different translations in the world. And in a sense, what we're trying to do is take a concept from 2004 and giving it a translation in the technology of 2017. So that's sort of, we're using the technology to give the same concept a different translation and see if it works. So that's what we're trying now. That sort of is an example of something we're always forced to do, which is that it's never going to be that exactly what you did somewhere can be done somewhere else. You always have to think of what is it that you really think is driving it, and then try to move that. And that process is sort of an interesting one for us and makes our work much more challenging than simply running trials. It's something that we are both, I think, it's something that we both enjoy, I think, because it's a process of discovery and are often frustrated by. Other example I was going to give is the work on what we call teaching at the right level. So this goes back to the question of why was it that, remember I said, We doubled the number of teachers, nothing happened. And I think we did a number of our randomized controlled trials with Pratham, kind of trying to figure that out. And there were kind of things that were really surprising there. So a number of these randomized controlled trials, Pratham went and trained government teachers in exactly what they do, how to try to teach children the skills that they are missing. And almost every time when they did that, we would find that despite the fact that the materials were the same, the teachers were well trained, we would find no effects. But when Pratham trained young, often not professional teachers, but like village volunteers to go and do the same thing, they would have large effects on test scores. So one possible answer to why this was happening was, of course, the cynical answer, which is that government teachers are useless. That would have been one answer that we were tempted by that answer, and lots of people are around to tempt us with it. But it turned out that we did one particular RCT which we had not planned on, and when we got an opportunity, we did it. It was one summer when we had the chance to train. We had the chance to train offer some of the government teachers to do some extra summer work in their own schools, and we trained them with the Pratham methodology to try to see if that improved teaching. And it turned out that within a month, they had very large effects on the children who went to school. So it's not that the government teachers couldn't do it. They could do it. They chose not to do it. They knew how to do it. They could do it. They chose not to do it during school year. So I think gave us the clue to what the core problem is. So in some sense, again, going back to this idea that in the end, what becomes really interesting, challenging, and difficult is to identify the source of success and failure. Sometimes we succeed, sometimes we fail. But what's the pattern behind it? And I think the pattern there, what was really interesting, is what I would call the tyranny of the curriculum. Teachers are dedicated to the curriculum. If you ask them, why aren't you using this material Pratham gave you? The answer is, I don't have time to complete the curriculum. Teachers want to complete the curriculum. Why? That sounds good, but the problem with that is that completing the curriculum works very well when all the kids are ready for the curriculum. The problem is that teachers complete the curriculum even when the kids have getting nothing out of it. So from Pratham's data that more than half the children in class 3 can't read, but they're doing social studies, all of them. What are they learning? Nothing. They are staring at some blackboard where some words are being written. The teacher is saying something, but they have no idea what's going on. And that particular process explains why doubling the number of teachers doesn't help. Because if the teacher is essentially teaching 3 people in the class and nobody else is connected, then you can double 2 teachers, they'll still teach the only 3 people who can be taught. Everybody else is so far behind that they're not interesting to the teachers. The teachers are teaching the curriculum. Now this I think, once you figure this out, you can see that this will have many applications. So one interesting application recently is, with Karthik Muralidharan's work with MindSpark in Delhi, where what they do is they essentially create an interface where they can identify where a child who's working on math, or a young boy who's working on math or science or reading, where he's getting stuck. And because they can identify where he's getting stuck, they can then help him with that piece on a tablet. The tablet can switch him to that piece and show him how to go past that. And when they do that, you see massive effects over a very short period. So in other words, once you understand that the problem is that children are stuck at different places, teaching ignores that completely, then it's very easy to solve the problem. But it took us a long time to get to that understanding. Now that we have that understanding, this is something that Pratham is taking it worldwide. They're working with the government of Zambia to kind of scale up the same idea in Zambia with the teaching system. So in some sense, this is I thought I'll spend a bit more time on this, because this is sort of what makes maybe to give us a sense of what we do, or why does it take us so long to come to to influence policy. The reason why it takes so long is that at some level what we're trying to do is go beyond that step of just saying here's an RCT, here's a result. We're trying to provide the thinking as well, and that thinking is what is, I think, both interesting, challenging, and time consuming. But nevertheless, we have now done that thinking in multiple cases, and there are multiple things that we have, I think, come to a fairly firm conclusion and have been working with our partners, which are often governments, to take this to scale. So, for example, we did a randomized control trial with the Ministry of Rural Development in Bihar to change the way funds flow in government. So this seems completely nitty-gritty, meaning instead of sending the money from the state ministry to the panchayat directly, usually it goes through the district and the block. If you change that, it turns out that a ton of corruption gets reduced. Something like 20% of the funds get saved as a result of that. So it's just that change. The fact that the money doesn't go through many intermediaries helps. So that idea and the resulting idea that you should create a fund flow mechanism in government which cuts out intermediaries has now been implemented nationwide. It's something that, and the results from our study was used to make the case for scaling it up nationwide. So that's an example of something there where when you have and I mean, this evidence was, we spend lots of time chasing down, making sure that this evidence was reliable. For example, one thing to argue that a lot of money was being stolen, one thing we had to do was to show that we could reduce, this intervention reduced corruption. Now, problem with corruption is you don't see it. That's why it's there. So how do you show that it reduced corruption? Well, one thing you can do is you can take the people who are supposedly being paid for NREGA in this particular case and match them with the SECC, the Socioeconomic Survey, the census. The Socioeconomic Census is everybody. So you should be able to find those people. If you don't find those people, then something funny is happening. So you're giving money to people who don't show up there. Turns out that the match rate is much higher in the treatment places, the places which had the new fund flow mechanism, than in the places where there were the old fund flow mechanism. So we had to match millions and millions of observations to do this exercise, to see if we can show that the introduction of this fund flow mechanism changes corruption. We had to do, this requires matching kind of the entire population of Bihar in the SECC with the entire population of Bihar in the NREGA database. And it's a massive kind of, I guess, data mining exercise, which we eventually had to carry out. And that's, I think, what convinced people that there was really something going on. So I think, what's the next step for us? So I think as I was saying, we started by doing our cities. Now, then the next step of it was to try to think about how to interpret their cities, to think about what to scale up, how to scale up. I think the next step in that engagement is in some ways, an ideal is usually something you make up and don't really expect to get. But I think in a sense we have right now, which is remarkable. Thanks to Mr. Krishnan and his colleagues in Tamil Nadu, we have something like what we would have wanted in the ideal state, which is an engagement where there's of a two-sided process. So the process I described so far is we create the evidence, we bring it to the government, we try to persuade them to use it. I think the next step in that process, which makes it much more fluid, is when the government comes to us and says, this is what we're really interested in, can you do something about it? That's when we get to that, we are much more likely to do the things that are useful. Because we could do research and nobody might be interested. Then we go looking for people to be interested. I think what is the beauty of, what JPAL's partnership with the government of Tamil Nadu achieves is that it achieves a two-way interaction. We are able to respond to questions that the government is already posing by itself. And in that sense, we are able, and of course, it's not one way. When the question gets posed, we can go back and say, well, actually, I want you to think beyond this and think about this other aspect of it. So this interaction is what I think one of the places where we add some value. But I think by doing that, what we get to the place where we can actually deliver answers for which there is already a question. And I think that's very important. And that's where, in a sense, that's in some ways is our ideal, is to be in a public conversation where the questions come to us and not the questions that we make up. I mean, sometimes we will change the question because sometimes we understand the questions in a way different from others, and that has value. But I think fundamentally, it's very important for us to be more embedded in a public conversation where the questions are shared questions of the polity. Because I think then we are in a place to actually deliver. I think from all of this, I think we have now all the skills built up to deliver. And in some ways, the next step for us would be to build that in, to make that much more easily appropriable by the entire political system. And that's this model that we have in Tamil Nadu is an example of that. What do I look forward to? Well, I look forward to mostly more of the same. I think we're having a great ride. We've been incredibly lucky. We have incredibly wonderful staff. One thing, just this event was put together by a very small team from JPAL who put, don't stop sleeping and put it together, and everything in JPAL is like that. People don't sleep. Shobhini doesn't sleep. In fact, I just reminded her that she got an email from, I guess, her boss, Iqbal, saying that she should take tomorrow off because she's been working too hard to organize this event. And in fact, she said, no, I can't because I have meetings for the next 3 days. But I think I feel that we are incredibly fortunate to have, wonderful leadership here. Shobhini Aparna was also an ED of JPAL South Asia and is back working with us. We're very grateful to have her. We have great partners. Madhav is here. Nina is here. Joe Madiath is here. Mr. Krishnan is here. We have amazing partners. We have, and I think something that I should have said is that we have an amazing group of academics who work with us, unpaid, strictly driven by their passion for doing better research. Nick is here. Nick works on environmental issues in India. He's a professor at Yale. But we have 184 professors at places like Yale, MIT, Harvard, who are all kind of donating their time, in a sense, for this project. So I feel that we are in an amazing spot. It's just hard to say that, I want something entirely different. If I had to, so let me just, to end, let me say, what is one thing that I would maybe, if I had to say one place where I think we would like to B, I think we are, I still feel that in some ways we are an organization that talks to a fairly small number of the converted too much. What we would like, and that's why events like this, I hope some of you didn't know us very well till this event. And one thing I would like is us to have a deeper connection with society. I think that's where I think we would like to be in the next 10 years. Thank you.